Happy Friday. Brian Manning here with a weekly update. Let's get right to it. First of all, it's jobs week. I can't believe it. That means another month has gone by. We'll talk more about the jobs report in a minute because it's very important, but it just blows me away how quickly time goes by. Monday this week, relatively quiet news day, not a lot to talk about there. Tuesday this week, we had Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic talking. We always listen when Fed members talk because we think it's important. He said that they're in no rush to cut interest rates, and he feels like 50 basis points in cuts would be appropriate in the second half of the year. I really think it's all going to come down to the jobs reports, which we're going to talk about more. I think it's going to take a higher unemployment rate to really see weaker jobs reports and for the Federal Reserve to start making a move on rates. We're starting to see that. We'll look more at that in a moment. Inflation is coming down. We get a CPI report next week, so it'll be interesting to see where inflation moves from next week's data, but definitely the focal point is going to be jobs, probably to get the Federal Reserve to do something. So speaking of jobs, Wednesday of this week, we get the ADP report. So the first Wednesday of every month, you get ADP. ADP is the largest provider of private payrolls in the US. I really tend to think that they're the most accurate. They have 20 million data points that they sample from. So there's a lot of accuracy in what they're telling us. And ADP says in the month of February, we got 140,000 jobs that were created. What's important to look at here is in the jobs that were created, 13,000 of these 140,000 came from small businesses. The rest were made up between medium and large businesses. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute and why I think that number is actually really important for us to pay attention to. Also, Thursday this week, we got Jerome Powell speaking in front of the Senate. Jerome Powell said that he's not far from being confident that rate cuts would be appropriate. It's starting to feel like they're becoming more and more confident that inflation is moving down to the direction they want. Seems like they're going to be more confident based on the employment report that we got today, starting to see an uptick in unemployment, which we'll talk more about in a moment. But it feels like they're not far off. My guess is you're probably going to see something, unless there's crazy differences in these upcoming inflation reports or employment reports in the future. I think you're going to see June, July, somewhere in there for the rate cuts. Today, we get the BLS report. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This gives us the government's feedback on hiring. And let's take a look at that. So there was an expectation in the month of February that the BLS would come out and say that we had 200,000 jobs created, and they said we have 275,000 new jobs. You know, you look at this, it's just a stark contrast from what ADP is saying. I'm not trying to beat on the BLS when I say this. You know, it's a government entity. They're probably trying to do the best they can. ADP is working off 20 million data points, whereas the BLS in this part of their report is really going off modeling, but there always seems to be a big disconnect here. The challenge, though, is that markets move based on the way this report comes out. So if you look at the report that came out last month, it was giving us data for the month of January. It said we had 353,000 jobs that were created. Markets didn't like that, and mortgage rates worsened. Well, so now we get this report today. Okay, so we got 275,000 jobs. Expectation was 200,000, but then they come out and they look at the prior reports and they say, oh, I'm so sorry. In the month of January, we were off by 124,000. We misstated our jobs by 124,000 in January, 43,000 in December. We were off by a total of 167,000 jobs. So the challenge I see is that markets move based on this report, then they go back and correct them. They give these huge downward revisions, but the markets have already reacted. There was already a move in interest rates getting worse in the month of February into March, really from this employment report. So it's kind of, you know, it kind of irks me to see the changes in these reports as they come out because the data in the beginning is not that accurate for the BLS. Again, it's all modeling. I'm not trying to bash on them. It's just not as accurate as ADP. So, you know, what's interesting is if we look at ADP and we look at the BLS. So the BLS said of small businesses in the month of February, 151,000 jobs were created. But if you look at ADP, ADP says small businesses we created 13,000 jobs in the month of February. This is just a huge difference. You know, ADP is looking at 20 million data points. We're doing the birth death model here through the BLS, and it just really makes me wonder, you know, which one of these is more accurate, the guessing and the modeling or the data points? I'm sure you could see where I lean towards that one. Another important component of this report is going to be wage pressure inflation. This is really important. So we look at average hourly earnings. Average hourly earnings went from 4.4% down to 4.3%. So that's an easing in inflation. The Federal Reserve wants to see this because this inflation is easing. It gives them more opportunity to potentially lower rates in the future. And then we do look at weekly earnings. Yes, weekly earnings went up, but the reason why weekly earnings went up is because hours worked, so the average hours worked for employers across the country, went from 34.2 to 34.3. So when your hours work bump up a little bit, at that point in time, you see weekly hourly earnings go up as well. So that's really where we're at on the employment reports. I'm interested to see what happens again next month. What's really important to know, though, is that the unemployment rate crept up. It went from 3.7% to 3.9%. To me, that's probably the most impactful number. That's why the markets didn't have a meltdown on this today, even though there was 200,000 jobs expected to be created, and the headline report showed 275,000. Because unemployment went from 3.7 to 3.9, the Federal Reserve really feels like, at least for what they said, they don't really want to see it go past 4.1. So we're really close to that kind of cap that the Federal Reserve wants to see, which really would mean that we're getting closer to seeing a light on Federal Reserve rate cuts. I'm around all weekend. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want to learn how we're closing purchase transactions in 10 days, give me a call. Happy Friday. Hope you have a great day.